today's video, I wanted to talk about a couple things. So I had a friend ask me, how do you use colors that are not really like skin tones, but in the context of the picture, it looks like a skin tone, right? And I thought that was an interesting question because I work in a different order, maybe? Like, I don't think of, like, oh, I'm gonna use blue or gray or whatever as the skin tone. I'm gonna show you how I cook that up today. So as you can see, I have some colors here that don't really look like skin tones. We've got some purples and greens and blues and stuff and grays, and how the heck do we get from that to this? So I have a couple of characters with some dramatic lighting, and yeah, we're gonna get into that. I want this to be like a quick tutorial. I don't want this to be like super complicated, because I just feel like, there's a time and a place for an in-depth tutorial. I just want this to be kind of simple, just so you can jump right in to just coloring your comic books, okay? So, anyway. Yeah, so I think the most important thing that helps speed up my coloring process is using your layers effectively. So if we look at the top character, I'll just kind of deconstruct this for a moment here. So then we're gonna want to add some depth. So on this one, I kind of use like purple. I don't really like to use, they say not to use pure black or pure white in art or painting or drawing, like whatever. My view with comic books is that I've already placed all of the darkest darks. Like the black is in the ink. I don't really need more. And I feel that skin, you're gonna want like something more colorful. So for this character, she's kind of like cool toned, and she is also a vampire, so she's supposed to look kind of cold and pale. So she has a purpley shadow, and I use this in the hair and also the skin, but yeah, so you can see if I take that on and off, purple shadow. This is a multiply layer, so we're gonna want that to be multiply. If you're not really familiar with layers, really all that means is, so if you're a painter, that would be like adding a glaze, and if you don't know what that means, it's basically a see-through layer of color, right? So it's see-through and it layers on top of the under layer. So on this character, we have some shade. Okay, so her shading is there. Similar thing, I just used like, I like, my go-to is kind of this like grayish, purplish color. So that's kind of my go-to. It's kind of hard to mess that up, so yeah. Anywho, darkish, purplish, grayish color on your multiply layer. Slap that on. One other pro tip I like to consider is, especially with comic book coloring, you kind of want to blend, you want to have like some hard edges and some soft edges to your shading. And we can get into brushes in another video. Again, I want this to be quick. I just kind of want to make, doing skin tones a little easier for you. And a little more formulaic, so you don't like, I don't feel that I approach this super painterly. I approach this like a digital artist. But anyway. So yeah, so we have our shadows. I have labeled some of my layers because I am an agent of chaos and I don't label them all. But anyway, I've labeled this ambient shade. So this is just kind of like, it's like somewhat ambient lighting. If you're not familiar with that term, it's kind of like where two forms meet, there tends to be a shadow. So that's kind of what I've done here. I have taken a little bit of creative liberty and assumed that the light source is coming from up. But yeah, so, but again, this isn't a lighting video. This is about coloring skin tones. So on the next layer, I now have a hard light layer. This makes the colors that you put on it kind of like a brighter. I'll be real, I'm not a computer scientist. I'm not actually 100% sure what hard light does. I just know it makes the brights look brighter. And yeah, so the brights kind of just sit on top of what you previously have, which is really helpful in comics. So I've added my highlights, and we're gonna go down to our other character. I added some lights here, and the same thing, you want to approach it with, when you're doing skin tones, again, your shadows, you kind of want to be a color, whether maybe that's like a grayish blue or like a grayish purplish, or even I've done like a weird like grayish reddish color. Whatever you got going on, we'll actually get into how that affects the appearance of the colors later. But yeah, so your shadows, you kind of want to pick a muted color, and then for your highlights, you are going to want, again, it's a situation where you don't want to use no white at all. You certainly can, but you want to use it very sparingly. So typically with the lights, you want to be adding a soft color. You can see here I've kind of done some warm, I kind of went in with like a warm, so I used like warmer colors. You can kind of see, like, if we pull this color, it's kind of like a dark red, and then this one's a little more orangey. So what I did was I went and I took kind of like this warm color brush, but yeah. So if you add, I love that I'm using a mouse. I'm literally a professional digital artist, and I'm like I didn't even bust out my tablet. That's, you know, again, agent of chaos here. All right, let me get the tablet out. But yeah, so as you can see, if I add this like warm tone, it adds just like that nice dimension. It's adding a lot of dimension to our skin here, because if I just use pure white, like that just doesn't look right, you know, unless it's like a very hot, like bright light. That it is just not what we're going for, right? We want to show like the life in the skin. And then right here it's like a little more reddish, so I think what I did was I kind of did more of an orangey color here, you know, and it's just giving us this like beautiful like depth. That's obviously like a little much because I kind of already did it, but you get the point. So yeah, now for the skin here, the pale vampire skin, that's going to be a really different situation, right? So the paler the skin, actually, the more see-through it is, which causes more subsurface scattering. That's like, oh, what is that term? I don't know that either. Subsurface scattering really just means that the light is kind of passing through and then dispersing, right? We're literally seeing through the skin a little bit. This is less apparent, the more melanin you have in your skin. So that's not going to be as obvious on our darker skinned character, but on our light skinned character, that is going to be more noticeable. Now again, this character isn't like a vampire, so it's okay if she looks a little like pale. But in general, you do want to consider the subsurface scattering. Say that 10 times fast. So I have that here where I've kind of added a warmer color, where the shadow and the light, like I guess that my ambient shadow and lighter spot meet. It's kind of like a more saturated situation here. So, but you can kind of see how that warms up the complexion a little bit. She looks very icy without the subsurface scattering. Admittedly, this is for tutorial purposes. This isn't like necessarily world accurate. But again, I color comic books, so this is just, you know, kind of what we're working with. But yeah, so again, if I really wanted to leave her like this, I could. Again, she would just look very like icy and cold, whereas she looks like she has a little bit more life and like color to her skin when she has the subsurface scattering. So that's just something to consider. And again, with the technique on that, so I kind of just took this like pink color, and I literally, oh, here I am not talking about the layers. So this one is a normal layer. Meaning that it is basically opaque. It's almost like adding another layer of paint on top of what you have been doing. I will also list the layer order at some point in this video, so that is just like visually makes sense. But anywho, so I just did a normal layer, and I literally took my airbrush and just went over like top of where the two meet. I don't want this color to be darker than the shadow, so if you're kind of struggling, you could do like a black and white filter to just like kind of see your values. I'm eyeballing it. I think it's okay. It's good enough for me. So yeah, so that is our subsurface scattering. Again, just adding a little bit of warmth to the character with really pale skin. So here, I can actually take this off. Yeah, so next thing is, this is a really easy way to add just some atmosphere to your character art, is adding a filter layer, or I call it a filter layer. So what I did here was I literally just took, this is a multiply layer, I took a gradient, so if you click your gradient, if you add a cool one, anything you erase or anything that remains from your original color palette, right? If you're adding like a cool color like blue, for example, your other colors by comparison are going to look warm. And if I do the opposite, if I add a very warm shadow, so like this, you know, orangey color, it's actually going to, by comparison, make the like the colors from our original palette here, will look cool. And it's the same thing on the bottom here. You add, which I did add, I just was having fun painting this, so let me actually erase this little bit of backlight, just so you can see what I'm talking about. Yeah, so if you add a blue filter and again erase like the edges to show backlighting again. So the light is, your light is like coming from the back. The filter is blue, so that is going to look, it's going to make the remaining colors look warm by comparison. And if we add a warm filter, this color on the edge is going to look much cooler by comparison. So that's just a good way to like add atmosphere. So a lot of my comic has to do with like underwater stuff. So I like to kind of play with cooler tones, blues, purples, etc., but it will just kind of depend on your situation. Again, if it's maybe it's a sunset scene, like the warm shadows are gonna make more sense. So yeah, but I really enjoy these cool shadows personally. But yeah, and then for this character, I just really enjoyed like doing the blue backlighting, so I'm gonna do that again on my hard light layer. And yeah, so another thing is, another pro tip, and this is just very simple. If the light over, I keep doing that. If the light over here is warm, the light over here is warm, right? So maybe that's an orange, maybe that's a yellow, a red, whatever. Then your opposite lighting is going to be a cool color. So if I go on the opposite of the color wheel, we're gonna go blue. So as you can see, this is like lit very warmly, but then the backlighting is blue. So you can also just paint that on. You don't necessarily have to do a filter, but yeah. So here. I found with this character, it was kind of just easier to paint it. But yeah, I just want this to make sense. Use your layers. They are your friends. So yeah, so just remember, you start out with your flats and then you build from there. So I have flats. Typically my order is flats at the bottom, normal layer, a multiply layer for shading, a normal layer for subsurface scattering, if that applies, hard light layer above that with your highlights, and then on top of that, you can do some kind of filter layer, or even just leave it the way that it is. It's going to depend on the lighting situation, of course, but yeah. So I hope that just makes skin tones make sense, kind of, possibly, sort of, but yeah. Thanks for coming to my video, and I hope that was helpful.